The series begins on June 14, 2015, with a frantic 911 call from a neighbor named Lacey, reporting that Dee Dee's house is silent and no one is responding. Concerned about disturbing Facebook posts from Dee Dee, Lacey urges the police to hurry. Meanwhile, Mel, her mother, climbs through a window into Dee Dee's home to investigate. As police sirens approach, as they stare silently in the stillness. Soon, detectives enter the house and make a grisly discovery. Dee Dee's lifeless body, brutally stabbed, lies in the main bedroom. Shocked, Lacey and Mel worry about the whereabouts of Dee Dee's daughter, Gypsy. The story then jumps forward 7 years. Dee Dee and her daughter Gypsy Rose reside in their new Habitat for Humanity home, where Gypsy, who is sick and wheelchair-bound, requires constant care. The pair relocated to Springfield, Missouri, following the devastation of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, settling in a new neighborhood in 2008. In one scene, they participate in a television interview, with Dee Dee expressing her joy about receiving the home, likening it to a dream come true. During this time, Dee Dee administers a medication concoction to Gypsy through a long tube, a routine part of Gypsy's care. Later that night, Dee Dee sings a lullaby to her daughter before she uses a sleep apnea machine. Afterwards, Dee Dee indulges in her own medications, including one labeled Sleepy Baby, retrieved from a closet brimming with medicine bottles. The following day, their neighbor Lacey pays them an unexpected visit, offering to give Gypsy a makeover, which Dee Dee cautiously agrees to. As the makeover progresses, Gypsy shares childhood memories, including how her father once ridiculed her walking style before she relied on a wheelchair, with Dee Dee listening attentively in the background. Despite Gypsy's discomfort, Dee Dee insists on removing all of the makeup. The following morning, determined to engage with their new community, Dee Dee and Gypsy set out to meet their neighbors, encountering Lacey and her boyfriend Mel washing their car. Dee Dee approaches Lacey's mother, Mel, who is relaxing with her friend Shelley, and they engage in a conversation about parenthood. Dee Dee repeatedly mentions her daughter's numerous medical conditions, paraplegia, epilepsy, anemia, and a heart murmur, earning admiration from Shelley and Mel for her unwavering dedication to caring for her daughter. The conversation halts momentarily when Lacey offers Gypsy a sip of Coke, prompting Dee Dee to rush over and inform everyone that Gypsy is allergic to sugar. The following day, Dee Dee takes Gypsy to the mall, where Gypsy asks for a blue necklace. Dee Dee discreetly slips the necklace into Gypsy's bag, only to notice her neighbor Mel observing her at the last moment. Later, Dee Dee attempts to speak with Mel, who ignores her, prompting Dee Dee to plan a party at her house to appease Mel and maintain her silence. Meanwhile, Gypsy uses her mother's laptop to search for best friend and boyfriend kiss, hastily deleting the search history before Dee Dee returns home. The film then transitions to the party, where a lively crowd has gathered in the yard. Dee Dee warmly greets each guest, but the atmosphere shifts when Gypsy decides to eat a cupcake, a potentially life-threatening action due to her supposed sugar allergy. Dee Dee panics upon noticing Gypsy eating the cupcake and rushes to administer an EpiPen injection. The guests are left astonished, marveling at the sacrifices Dee Dee makes for her daughter's well-being. Gypsy regains consciousness in the hospital after overhearing the doctor informing Dee Dee that she is not allergic to sugar. While leaving, they come across Mel, who is waiting outside to deliver Dee Dee's wallet, which she had left at the party. Dee Dee thanks her and expresses her regret that she does not want people to see her as a woman with a bad reputation because of her past. Mel also reveals her own troubled past, so she understandably offers to start over. Gypsy puts her daughter to bed at night and turns on her sleep apnea machine. Dee Dee opens a stash of checks addressed to Claudine Blanchard, possibly her real name, as Gypsy drifts off to sleep. She then goes to bed next to her daughter. Gypsy wakes up while her mother is still sleeping and turns off her machine to get out of bed. Gypsy, who had been in a wheelchair up until this point, stands up and slowly tiptoes out of the room. She then goes into the kitchen to eat some whipped cream while getting her EpiPen ready. But there's no shock after she licks a handful. It turns out that she isn't allergic to sugar. Her mother lied about it. When she returns to her room, she is surprised to see her mother awake, who yells angrily at her to go back to bed. Gypsy sits in front of her laptop on another night, watching makeup videos on YouTube while eating a tub of frosting and a Coca-Cola drink. She soon feels a pain in her tooth, possibly from a cavity. Gypsy has been named the community's Child of the Year, and Dee Dee wakes her up the next morning to tell her. She notices Gypsy's tooth problems as she informs her. Dee Dee immediately suspects an underlying condition and takes her daughter to see Dr. Harley, their pediatrician. They meet with the doctor at the hospital, and Dee Dee believes Gypsy's acid reflux has returned, causing her teeth to decay. While the doctor summons Dr. Chandra, a gastroenterologist, to examine Gypsy, Dee Dee steals his prescription pad from the counter. Dr. Chandra suggests Dee Dee make an urgent dental appointment in the following scene. However, Dee Dee wants to treat her daughter's acid reflux first, which makes the doctor suspicious. As a result, she requests Gypsy's medical records, but Dee Dee informs her that they were destroyed during Hurricane Katrina. Dee Dee rushes her daughter away before the doctor can say anything. Dr. Chandra later asks Dr. Harley if he has confirmed Gypsy's complete medical history, but the latter does not respond. The scene then shifts to Dee Dee and Gypsy waiting in their car outside a pharmacy. Surprisingly, Dee Dee pulls out the stolen writing pad and forges some prescriptions on it. Returning to the present, the detectives inspect Dee Dee's stab wounds. Meanwhile, Lacey suspects that someone was looking for Gypsy rather than her mother. She also tells the detectives about Gypsy's various illnesses. The film goes back to 2009, when Gypsy has one of her teeth completely rot out while brushing her teeth. As the sink becomes a bloody shambles, she whimpers in agony. As a result, her mother begins to give her more unnecessary medications. Dee Dee eventually takes Gypsy to Lacey's, where she is hanging out with her friends. While the girls are discussing trivial matters, one of them notices Gypsy's bad tooth, prompting Gypsy to reveal that she has been sneaking out at night to eat sweet things. Meanwhile, Dr. Chandra refuses to abandon her suspicions. She contacts several hospitals to learn more about Gypsy's medical history. Allison, one of the Child Protection Services representatives, arrives on Dee Dee's doorstep after she finally calls them. When Dee Dee notices this, she immediately takes action, feeding sleeping pills to Gypsy to make her appear sick. Allison greets everyone and takes a look around the house. When she asks for Gypsy, Dee Dee tells her that her daughter has the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Allison soon sits alone with a medicated Gypsy, while Dee Dee lurks at the doorway. She constantly interrogates the little girl to see if she is okay. Gypsy, on the other hand, appears disoriented and dizzy as she speaks, confirming her mother's claims. Allison then questions Dee Dee about her social security card not matching the name on her address. But the mother, as usual, uses Hurricane Katrina as an excuse. Allison decides to end her visit because she discovered no suspicious activity. Gypsy is then taken to the dentist by Dee Dee to have her teeth extracted. She awakens from anesthesia with the majority of her teeth missing. The little girl sobs as she looks in the mirror at her swollen mouth. Gypsy later tells her mother that she does not want to attend her Child of the Year award because she does not want to show herself in such a state in front of others. This infuriates Dee Dee, who yells that Gypsy is going to the event. We are then transported to the award ceremony, where Dee Dee is preparing her daughter for the big day. She also brings Gypsy some dentures to wear on stage. Her name is eventually called out on stage for the Child of the Year award. Along with the honor comes $5,000 in financial assistance. Dee Dee can't stop smiling after receiving the check while the crowd cheers for them. She then delivers an emotional speech before Gypsy, and she performs an impromptu rendition of "I'll Be There." Meanwhile, despite Dee Dee's reluctance, Dr. Chandra calls to check on Gypsy and manages to get an appointment with her. Gypsy and Dee Dee return to the hospital in the evening for their appointment with Dr. Chandra. The doctor manages to talk to Gypsy alone in her room and tries to persuade her that she isn't allergic to sugar. She offers Gypsy a can of Coke, but she refuses to drink it out of love for her mother. Just then, Dee Dee appears, prompting the doctor to put the can away and begin examining Gypsy. Cops are still searching Dee Dee's home for clues to the murder in 2015. Lacey later tells them about Gypsy's secret Facebook account. She's set up to make friends and assumes she has a boyfriend. Following this, the film flashes back to 2011. Dee Dee collects all of the donations to her ostensibly sick daughter's GoFundMe page. Meanwhile, Gypsy maintains her nighttime routine of sneaking out of bed to watch YouTube videos on kissing and cosplays. She then gets ready for Fantasticon, a cosplay event, while applying makeup to her mother. When asked about her daughter's birth year while checking in at the event, Dee Dee says 1995, when the girl at the counter asks. Gypsy is perplexed because she has always assumed she was born in 1993. At the event, the two run into Shelley and her boyfriend. Meanwhile, one of the neighbors, Russ, notices Dee Dee and attempts to ask her out on a date. Dee Dee, on the other hand, changes the subject and requests to use the restroom, while Gypsy approaches a man dressed as Wolverine. Scott introduces himself, and they talk about their favorite Marvel characters. Scott agrees after Gypsy insists on seeing the DeLorean from Back to the Future. Fortunately, they have been invited to the front lines. Scott picks up Gypsy and places her in one of the seats, and the two have a good time together. Unfortunately, their good time is cut short when Dee Dee interrupts them and rushes Gypsy home. At the same time, Russ appears again, attempting to catch Dee Dee's attention and revealing that he, too, had a son in a wheelchair before he died. Gypsy sneaks out after they get home and tuck themselves into bed to open a Facebook account in the hopes of finding Scott online. She becomes confused about her birth date again and checks her mother's purse. Her actual birthday is in 1991, which means she is 19 years old. She steals money from her mother, enraged by her mother's lies. Gypsy steals a cell phone from a gas station the next day. In the following scene, Dee Dee receives a call from Russ, prompting her to inquire as to how he obtained her phone number. Meanwhile, Gypsy begins communicating with Scott via her new phone, telling him about her hospital staff, whom she refers to as her friends. Russ continues to call Dee Dee, but their budding romance is cut short when he offers to help her with her sick daughter. Dee Dee, as expected, does not want anyone close enough to expose her lies. Gypsy, on the other hand, has grown close to Scott. She hints subtly that she wants to flee with him. She also gives him her address in case he wishes to send her a gift. He surprises her with a package containing a red Ariel wig. Lacey notices Gypsy smiling at her phone one day and inquires about it. The little girl, unlike her mother, shares everything. She speaks of Scott, whom she refers to as the Prince Charming. Before leaving, she tells Lacey about her secret Facebook account, which goes by the name Emma Rose. Later that night, Gypsy receives a message from Scott, informing her that he is in the hospital's emergency room and thus unable to communicate. Gypsy is concerned about this and rushes to the hospital. Scott is surprised that Gypsy can stand on her own 2 feet when he first sees her. Dee Dee returns home and discovers that her daughter is nowhere to be found. She then discovers a note Gypsy left, stating that she is fleeing with her Prince Charming and will never return. Scott takes Gypsy to his house elsewhere. She appears to be relieved to be home with her Prince Charming and applies an ice pack to his bruises. They kiss after a while of chatting, but are interrupted by Dee Dee at the door. Dee Dee begs her daughter to come home, admitting that she nearly had an anxiety attack while she was away. Gypsy reluctantly agrees to return after hearing her mother's voice. Before they leave, Dee Dee informs Scott that Gypsy is only 14 years old. When Dee Dee returns home, she pulls her daughter's red hair and forces her back into the wheelchair. Gypsy looks out her window in 2013 to watch Matt, the lawn mowing guy. Although her mother treats her like a baby, it is clear that she has the sexual drive of a young woman. Dee Dee interrupts her, requesting that her daughter take a bath. Gypsy reluctantly agrees, and by the time Dee Dee has finished scrubbing her, she's on her period. Dee Dee becomes agitated when she notices blood stains on the bath mat. Having her mother clean up menstrual blood is a small victory for Gypsy right now, given her mother's emotional torment. She gives a cheeky smile before her mother begins cleaning the mat. A doctor examines Dee Dee at the hospital and informs her that she has type 2 diabetes and must receive insulin shots. Gypsy asks the doctor if her mother's condition is serious, and the doctor confirms it, adding that it could be fatal. Gypsy is concerned about her mother's declining health. After all, she is her mother's daughter. It's Gypsy's birthday next, but she's still not convinced of her mother's lie that she was born in 1995, not 1991. Dee Dee claims that the birth date Gypsy discovered was a typo, and that she is now 18 years old. As a birthday present, she gives Gypsy a pair of pet guinea pigs. Meanwhile, Lacey pays a visit to Gypsy and mentions that she met her new boyfriend on a Christian dating site. Gypsy is intrigued, so she asks Lacey to show her around. Dee Dee receives a call from Gypsy's father, who wishes his daughter a happy birthday. But, as usual, Dee Dee lies about Gypsy being terminally ill and having only a few days to live. A call from Gypsy's nurse at the hospital interrupts their conversation. Gypsy is now 18 years old, and the nurse informs her that anything invasive requires her consent. Dee Dee becomes concerned and goes to find Gypsy after hanging up the phone. Dee Dee scolds her daughter for taking the guinea pigs outside and rushes her inside when she sees Gypsy and Lacey sitting on the porch. Later, she tries to scare Gypsy about what lies beyond their front door, such as creepy stalkers who kidnap young girls. Dee Dee wishes to obtain legal guardianship of her grown daughter in order to prevent Gypsy from giving consent. When she and Gypsy go to see a lawyer, she continues to control Gypsy, making sure she says the right thing to keep the act going. Fortunately, the lawyer determines Gypsy is competent on her own and rejects Dee Dee's request. Dee Dee then takes Gypsy to a shopping mall and rants about how she couldn't get guardianship. However, her diabetes appears to be affecting her slowly, as her ankles are swelling and she is dizzy. Gypsy requests that her mother sit while she goes to the pharmacy to get medication. But she goes to a laptop store and buys one for herself, hoping to explore the online digital site. Gypsy quickly sneaks her laptop into their van and hides it before her mother notices. She discovers her mother in distress on her way back to the mall. They rush back home, and Gypsy administers insulin to her mother. Dee Dee asks Gypsy if she loves her. Gypsy reluctantly nods, but her face shows she longs to be free of her controlling mother. Later that night, Gypsy joins the dating site that Lacey told her about. She poses in a black wig and posts her profile picture on the website. The next day, Dee Dee requests that she and Gypsy watch Twilight, but her daughter's mind is elsewhere. Gypsy wants to see Matt, the lawn mower, again, but her mother persuades her to watch the movie. When an intimate scene begins, Dee Dee covers Gypsy's eyes, but Gypsy sneaks a peek through her mother's fingers. Gypsy uses her new laptop to browse the dating site again that night. She discovers numerous messages on her profile, including one from Matt, the lawnmower guy who displays his private parts, which surprises her. Just then, a man named Nick appears, eager to converse. Gypsy agrees to his request, and the two quickly become acquainted. Nick remarks that she looks like a princess. Their text conversation is transferred to the live webcam. Gypsy mentions using a wheelchair and vaguely explains how difficult her life has been. Nick, on the other hand, claims that he accepts Gypsy for who she is, despite her health issues. He also discusses his multiple personalities and his dark side. Meanwhile, Dee Dee contacts her lawyer to inquire about a power of attorney, as she wishes to have complete control over her daughter's life. The lawyer informs her that she must have Gypsy sign some paperwork before Dee Dee can be considered her legal caregiver. As a result, Dee Dee's act resumes. One night, she pretends to have low blood sugar and requests Gypsy's assistance. While Gypsy is checking her sugar level, Dee Dee tells her that lying and cheating are wrong and tells her about how she ended up in jail a few years ago for doing so. She scares her daughter by explaining the long-term consequences of lying to people. Before presenting the power of attorney papers, Dee Dee says there's a way for them to stay safe and avoid going to jail. She presents the papers to her daughter as a threat that she will be held accountable for her mother's crimes of defrauding people. Gypsy reluctantly signs her name on those papers. Later, Gypsy weeps into Nick's webcam, explaining how she has been trapped her entire life. She then informs him that she does not require the wheelchair. Instead, it was her mother who forced her to do this. Nick wants to calm Gypsy down, so he offers to show her an explicit image of a strange bit of erotica. Dee awakens the next morning to find Gypsy gone from her bed. So she goes to Gypsy's room and finds Gypsy on the floor, still holding the laptop. Dee rushes to the kitchen and smashes the laptop with a hammer. Gypsy awakens to a thudding sound, only to find her mother lashing out at her. Gypsy, on the other hand, rebels, claiming she'll buy another one. This only makes Dee crazier. She drags her daughter into the common room, throws her on the bed, and tries to tie her arms behind her back. Gypsy, frustrated, fights back and spits in her mother's face. Gypsy tries to flee as her mother shatters into pieces, but she returns to her mother. Gypsy is trapped in a variety of ways, one of which is psychological. Later that night, as their online relationship deepens, Gypsy shares more about her life with Nick. She feeds his dark side, while he creates sexual tension between them. Gypsy brushes up against herself, learning more about the adult world. The show then jumps to 2015, where Gypsy continues to fall deeper for Nick, but Nick wants to pay her a personal visit. He laments the fact that they have been together for 2 years and must now see each other physically rather than digitally. Gypsy is unsure because her mother would never allow her to have a boyfriend. She has an epiphany. Nick can accidentally run into her and Dee, giving the impression that he is meeting Gypsy for the first time. Gypsy invites Dee to a Disney trip the next morning. Her mother's health, on the other hand, appears to be deteriorating by the day, as she refuses to take insulin or exercise. Dee lashes out when Gypsy won't stop bugging her about going on the trip. She grabs Gypsy's shoulder, mocking her for doing everything she could to keep a roof over their heads. The series then shifts to Wisconsin, where we finally meet Nick in person. He works as a waiter at Pizza Peddler but has recently been promoted to the kitchen. His boss shows him how to make a pizza, but it doesn't go well. When Nick inadvertently knocks 2 uncooked pizzas onto the floor, he is dispatched as a walking pizza advertisement slice. Later that night, he returns to his lonely room and begins his usual routine of communicating with Gypsy, his online girlfriend. During their conversation, Nick jokes that his dark side is capable of violent acts such as murder. Gypsy shrugs it off, but she appears concerned. Dee announces that she will be taking her daughter to see the new Cinderella film. Gypsy then purchases a bus ticket for Nick in order for them to meet at the movie premiere. She tells him to get to the premiere a little earlier so he can open the door for her and her mother, hoping that his courtesy will impress Mom. However, the movie day does not go as planned. Gypsy, dressed in her Cinderella gown, arrives at the theater with her mother. She looks around for her boyfriend Nick, but he is nowhere to be found. Just as she begins to despair, she sees Nick, and the two appear to be delighted to see each other in person for the first time. When Dee arrives to pick up Gypsy after purchasing movie tickets, Nick makes a mistake and scares Dee. She rushes into the house with her daughter. Gypsy is more concerned with waiting for Nick to enter the hall than with the screen once inside. When Nick comes to sit behind her, her face brightens. When Dee sees him, she immediately moves her daughter to the next corner. However, Nick continues to follow them and sit behind them. Dee becomes enraged and moves to the next corner. Nick eventually gets up and leaves, which upsets Gypsy, who had so many plans for their first meeting. Gypsy eventually uses the excuse of going to the restroom to look for Nick. Fortunately, she finds him in the hallway and encourages him to use the restroom so they can have some private time. They share their first kiss and lie on the bathroom floor for the first time to make love to each other. Gypsy then returns to the movie theater, pretending that nothing intimate has occurred. She and her mother are getting ready to leave after the movie. She then notices Nick waiting for her in the lounge area. Nick tries to open the exit door for Dee and Gypsy, but Dee confronts him. She takes Gypsy away, accusing him of being a pedophile and stalker. Dee is suspicious about Gypsy having met Nick before. Gypsy tells the truth and goes to her room to text Nick. Nick apologizes for failing to make a good impression on Gypsy's mother, but he is adamant about telling the truth about their relationship with Dee. Despite Gypsy's protests, Nick calls Dee and tells her everything. He states unequivocally that he and Gypsy have been in love for many years and that he is the father of her future children. He emphasizes his dominance, assuring her that she will not speak rudely and then hangs up. This aggravates Gypsy's situation. Dee Dee goes into aggressive mode and ties Gypsy to the bed in a desperate attempt to punish her for her actions. This only prompts Gypsy to text her boyfriend, requesting that his dark side, Victor, be activated so that he can assist her. She begs him to kill her mother because she can no longer bear the emotional and physical torment. Nick gives a horrifying look as things finally reach the point of terror. Gypsy sneaks away from her mother one day at the mall to make another secret purchase. Only this time it's not a laptop, but the knife she intends to use to stab her mother. Meanwhile, Dee Dee is terrified because she cannot find her daughter. She later runs into Gypsy in a toy store. Gypsy, it turns out, has had time to hide the knife and pretend she's buying a gift for her mother. Dee Dee sighs with relief after seeing her daughter, and they return home. Later that night, Gypsy confirms to Nick that they will kill her mother the next night and be together forever. The next morning, Nick drives from Wisconsin to Gypsy's house, where Gypsy offers to clip her mother's toenails. She also paints nails, and they share one last sweet moment together. Gypsy then suggests they go to Dr. Harley to have her feeding tube changed. This gets them out of the house for a while. Later that night, they go to bed together, but after Dee Dee falls asleep, Gypsy gets up and quickly packs her suitcase. This is when Nick shows up at her house. The film then flashes back to 1991 in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. Dee Dee is in the hospital giving birth to her daughter Gypsy. The doctors inform the patient that there is an issue with the umbilical cord, but they are able to cut it out. Takes a second, but the baby eventually wails, and the doctors tell Dee Dee that her baby is alive and well. Emma, Dee Dee's mother, then arrives to see her newborn granddaughter. It's easy to see that the two have issues with power and control. Dee Dee reluctantly hands over her daughter to her mother, while Emma insists on giving the baby a bath. Back in 2015, Nick and Gypsy are hurriedly exiting a cab and fleeing the crime scene. While Gypsy looks back at her mother's house for the last time, Nick shows no remorse. The two lovers then make their way to the motel where Nick was previously staying. Gypsy and Nick socialize in the motel room. They are pleased with the brownies they took from the house. Gypsy puts on a wig and records Nick on her camera. Nick and Gypsy lie in bed after getting intimate, but it isn't long before Gypsy realizes that their real-life conversations aren't as exciting as their online ones. It's one of many signs for her that this isn't turning out to be the fantasy she expected. Returning to 1991, Emma constantly criticizes her daughter Dee Dee's abilities as a new mother. Dee Dee is concerned that her daughter is ill. She wants to see a doctor, but Emma assures her that the baby is fine. The doctor informs them at the hospital that Gypsy is smaller than she should be at 2 months old, which is not uncommon. The doctor then tells them that he will send some supplements for the baby, and Dee Dee will have to feed her more in order for her to gain weight. Meanwhile, Emma continues to try to control Dee even in the hospital, demonstrating that Dee grew up to be exactly like her mother later in life. Dee Dee's cousin Janet and her 2 daughters pay her a visit in the following scene. Janet also lectures Dee Dee about how she doesn't need to see a doctor and is simply overprotective of her baby. After checking out of their motel room in 2015, Nick and Gypsy go out to dinner for breakfast. 2 police officers enter the diner as they order their food, and Gypsy begins to panic. She recalls that they still have the knife with them. Nick assures them that he will take care of it, but Gypsy stumbles and drops her anxiety pills. One of the officers notices it, picks it up, and returns it to her before realizing it was named after Claudinia Blanchard Dee Dee's real name. Fortunately, the officer sees nothing suspicious and walks away. The couple then decides to mail the knife to themselves in Wisconsin to avoid security checks at the bus station. Dee Dee is filming Gypsy in 1993, but she is so preoccupied with her daughter that she doesn't hear the knock on the door. Dee Dee has been arrested for felony check fraud, according to the police. As the cops handcuff Dee Dee, Emma brings Gypsy into the room to watch her mother be arrested. Gypsy begs her mother not to let her daughter see her in such a humiliating state. Dee Dee is sentenced to 6 months in prison for forging checks in court. She then tries to say goodbye to Gypsy, but Emma refuses. Dee Dee then yells that Emma could have raised the bond money. Dee Dee begs her mother to follow the doctor's schedule in order to care for Gypsy as she is dragged from the room. Back in the present, Nick and Gypsy arrive at the bus station for Wisconsin only to discover that Nick did not reserve a seat for Gypsy. Because there are no more seats available on that day's bus, they book 2 tickets for the next bus, which leaves in 2 days. Dee Dee is released from jail after 4 months. When she returns home, her daughter does not recognize her. Instead, she begins to cry. Dee Dee then scolds Emma because, according to the schedule, Gypsy should be sleeping instead of playing outside right now. Emma claims that her granddaughter is content with her. Later, despite Emma's assurances that Gypsy is fine, Dee Dee is concerned. She claims that Gypsy is clearly ill, and Emma is attempting to demonstrate that she is a better mother than Dee Dee. Emma simply smiles and says she could have told the cops Dee Dee wasn't there when they arrived looking for her. But she knew Dee Dee had to be taught a lesson. She then boasts that Gypsy has been better to her than Dee Dee since the day she was born. Nick is watching a violent movie at the motel, and Gypsy isn't impressed. She also does not enjoy their physical intimacy later on. She begins to realize that what she did to escape her mother was not only morally wrong, but she also regrets running away with Nick, who is utterly dull and a true sociopath. Back in 1997, Emma's health is deteriorating. Dee Dee appears concerned about Emma, but she refuses to go to the hospital. Later, a doctor informs Dee Dee that her mother's pain tolerance has failed and that Emma has only a few days to live. In the following scene, Emma struggles to breathe while Dee Dee tells her mother, through tears, that she loves her and knows Emma has always given her all. Emma, on the other hand, responds that Dee Dee made it impossible for her to live as she takes her final breath. Gypsy sneaks outside the next day to play on the trampoline with her cousins. Unfortunately, she slips and crashes to the ground. Her mother is holding her and she is barely moving. When Gypsy leaves the hospital and returns home, we see her for the first time in a wheelchair. Dee Dee encourages her to use it until she is strong enough, despite the fact that Gypsy's legs are fine. Fast forward to 2015, and Gypsy and Nick are on their way to Wisconsin. When they arrive at the bus stop, Nick's mother Kathy picks them up. Kathy and Gypsy talk as they drive, and it turns out Nick had told his family that Gypsy and her mother were homeless. Kathy begins to inquire about her mother, causing Gypsy to experience flashbacks. Gypsy is introduced to Kathy's boyfriend Vance and given a tour of their home. Gypsy gradually realizes that her Prince Charming's home is not what she expected. There is no food in the fridge for the family. She is irritated by his parents' rudeness and strangeness. She's taken aback when they don't have any medicine, not even Pepto-Bismol. When Nick shows her his cluttered room, her disappointment grows. Following that, Gypsy and Nick pull a prank in the supermarket and steal some food. Back at the house, Kathy brings up Gypsy's mother again, which has an effect on Gypsy. She begins to feel bad about abandoning her mother in a place where no one will find her for a long time. She walks out abruptly after having a couple of flashbacks to the day of the murder. Nick follows her, and Gypsy beseeches them to find her mother's body, claiming that someone else murdered her. They can live in her mother's old house together once her mother's body is exhumed. Nick then suggests posting a message to the shared Gypsy and Dee Dee Facebook page. This will cause someone to go to the house and stumble across the corpse. The couple then posts that by **** is dead, thinking it's exactly what a true murderer would say. The show quickly cuts to Lacey, who has returned home from a long day at work. She notices the post right away and calls her mother, Mel. Gypsy and Nick are skeptical that many people have seen the post, so they want to attract attention. Gypsy then writes another post in which she claims that the murderer raped Dee Dee's daughter, but she forgets to turn off the laptop's location. Mel and Lacey call out for Dee Dee at her house, but she does not respond. Lacey then decides to contact the police. Cops are now searching Dee Dee's home, while Nick and Gypsy prepare for dinner in Wisconsin. The package containing the knife they had sent to themselves arrives just then, and Vance hands it to Gypsy. Gypsy begins to panic and wants to get rid of the murder weapon as soon as possible. But Nick doesn't see the point in hurrying because it's too dark outside. Gypsy realizes he's completely clueless and continues to bug about their happily ever after not coming true. Nick's mother interrupts their brief argument, and the two agree to disagree for the time being. Meanwhile, authorities have traced the Facebook posts to Big Bend, Wisconsin. Later that night, a SWAT team and the sheriff surround Nick's house. Vance and Kathy emerge with their hands raised, while Nick and Gypsy remain hidden in the armoire. The cops quickly apprehend the two lovers. Before being arrested, Nick and Gypsy agree that they did the right thing and will simply tell the police the truth. The couple is then questioned at the police station. Gypsy, one of the detectives, questioned her about her involvement in the murder. Gypsy claims she is not involved. She even claims she had no idea her mother had died. Her act continues as she sobs and says she has always loved her mother, but the detective can tell she's lying. In the meantime, Nick is revealing the truth. He admits to stabbing Dee, explaining that he did it so that he and Gypsy could live happily ever after. He even admits that Gypsy was the one who requested that he murder her mother. Nick also discusses having multiple personalities and hearing voices in his head. He's also still convinced that he and Gypsy will start a family, despite the fact that he'll be going to prison. Given Nick's history of mental illness, the officer begins questioning him further. She asks if he had sex with Dee's dead body, to which Nick responds that he dislikes necrophilia. Kathy, Nick's mother, explains that Nick has a history of mental illness and that his mental age will always be around 15 or 16. She adds that she was surprised to see Gypsy act so casually after losing her mother. She then refers to Gypsy as a beast, as she is astounded by Gypsy's lack of emotion. Kathy also complains that her son's mental issues make it difficult for him to fully comprehend what he was doing. The series then shows Dee's face as her body is being prepared for burial in the morgue. Gypsy and Nick submit fingerprints and mugshots. Meanwhile, Mel and Lacey attend a press conference where the local sheriff provides an update on the investigation. He informs Lacey and Mel that they have located Gypsy and that she is safe. But they are perplexed when he goes on to say that things are not always as they appear. Later, they see Gypsy walk into court on her own 2 feet, as Mel and Lacey watch from home, completely stunned. Gypsy is informed that she faces life in prison or the death penalty for conspiring to murder her mother. When she hears this, she bursts into tears, realizing she will never have her happily ever after. The film then cuts to a scene in 1997 Louisiana. Dee and Gypsy, both 6 years old, were sleeping outside on the grounds after Emma died. Dee couldn't afford to buy her mother's house, so she had no choice but to leave. They promise to protect each other forever as they lie head to head looking at the stars. The show jumps to 2015, where Nick and Gypsy's punishment is announced if they are found guilty. They would both be charged with first-degree murder, which carries a life sentence or the death penalty. Gypsy's lawyer encourages her to speak up when the judge asks if she has anything to say about it. Gypsy is alone with her lawyer in the following scene. She is still unaware that the death penalty is an option for her crimes, so she asks if she could really be executed, to which the lawyer responds that Gypsy is currently viewed as a cold-blooded murderer. Gypsy clarifies once more that she couldn't kill her mother because she loved her so much. The lawyer shrugs and tells her that they need to change the story. Gypsy must appear more sympathetic in order to win people over to her cause. The lawyer then suggests obtaining Gypsy's medical records in order to demonstrate that Dee had been lying and manipulating Gypsy about her medical conditions. They may be able to win the case this way. However, there is a catch. The lawyer is unable to obtain the records due to the power of attorney documents that Dee forced Gypsy to sign. Gypsy's mother now has power of attorney over her, so she needs her father to retrieve the papers. Gypsy's lawyer then suggests she call her father, but she refuses, claiming she doesn't have one. She adds that he was never present in her life while her mother worked tirelessly to care for her. Later, the prison doctor examines Gypsy, and she uses the opportunity to ask if she can assist in obtaining the medical records. But the doctor flatly refuses and appears to be quite harsh with Gypsy. The doctor is not keen on Gypsy having fabricated problems when other inmates are suffering from cancer and stabbings. Gypsy's feeding tube is removed by the doctor because she no longer requires it. When Gypsy asks to keep the tube because it is the last thing she has of her mother, the doctor tells her it is now a biohazard and throws it away. Gypsy's prison life deteriorates as she is unable to make new friends. She eats her lunch alone and cries softly in her bed. When the female inmates, including Gypsy, form a line outside, Nick notices her and tells her that they, like the infamous couple Bonnie and Clyde, will die together. But it wasn't what Gypsy expected to hear. Later, Gypsy waits in line to speak with Lacey on the phone. Lacey, on the other hand, is less than enthusiastic after learning the truth about Gypsy and her mother. Gypsy claims that the media is spreading false information and that she is not guilty of the murder. She also invites Lacey to pay her a visit in prison so they can talk in person, but Lacey declines. Lacey asks Gypsy if she could walk the entire time, and Gypsy goes numb. Lacey says she has to go and hangs up after she explains her situation. With no one else to turn to, Gypsy calls her estranged father, Rod, while the inmate behind her chastises her for taking too long. She admits that she knows he doesn't know her, but she asks him for a favor. Gypsy wants her father to bring her medical records because it is her only way out. Mel and her neighbors are furious at the Blanchards for lying and cheating right in front of them. Mel refers to them as vampires, sucking them dry of their trust and goodwill. Lacey, on the other hand, believes there's more to the Blanchard story. She tells her mother that Gypsy called her the other day and asked her to come visit her, which irritates Mel even more. Gypsy is informed that someone has come to see her in prison. She thinks it's Lacey until she sees her father Rod in the waiting room. After a few awkward greetings, he hands her the medical records that his daughter had requested. Rod uses this visit to highlight several instances in which Dee lied to doctors about Gypsy's medical condition, including nearly a week of daily seizures and a case of leukemia at the age of 3 that never occurred. Gypsy realizes her mother never let her speak for her and made certain Gypsy followed her orders. Rod then clarifies that Dee made Gypsy her prisoner by speaking for her. Gypsy, on the other hand, responds that at least her mother was always there for her and loved her. Rod tries to explain that he met Dee at the age of 17, but she was much older. He was so young that he had no idea how to accept responsibility, but he still adores her. Rod adds that he tried to visit Gypsy several times, but Dee wouldn't let him because she always had a reason not to. Gypsy, on the other hand, does not believe his excuses and believes he could have tried harder. Rod claims that her mother made it difficult, particularly because she moved Gypsy from one location to another. He also mentions that he has been sending them checks on a monthly basis. Gypsy no longer wants to hear her father justify his actions, so she begins gathering medical records in preparation for her departure. She also refuses to believe how much her mother may have lied to her. Just as she is about to leave, her father begs her to stay a second longer and quickly shows her baby pictures with him. He shows a picture of himself holding an infant Gypsy to try to persuade her that he has been with her since the day she was born. Rod also has a photo of them from when she was 8 years old at the Special Olympics. It finally piques Gypsy's interest when she realizes her mother always claimed she had invited Rod, but he refused to come. Gypsy begins to cry as things finally make sense to her. Rod regrets not being present more often. Gypsy and Nick will then have their pretrial conference. Gypsy returns to her seat in the audience and sighs loudly when she sees her father. Her lawyer presents medical records as evidence that Dee manipulated and controlled her daughter's entire life. The evidence also distinguishes Gypsy's trial from Nick's because Gypsy was abused by Dee and her circumstances were very different from Nick's. Not surprisingly, this move astounds Nick, who tearfully states that he did the deeds solely for Gypsy. Gypsy asks her lawyer after the conference if her separate trial means she won't face the death penalty. Gypsy's lawyer explains that she must enter a guilty plea in order to receive a deal with less prison time. Meanwhile, Mel and Gypsy are watching a news segment about Gypsy's trial on TV. Mel is still enraged and turns off the television before calling the Blanchard swindlers. Lacey blames herself and tells her mother that she was the one who showed Gypsy the dating website where she met Nick. Gypsy did share some things, but she dismissed them because she thought they were all fantasies in her head. She regrets missing potential warning signs. Gypsy then calls her from prison again, but this time she ignores it. Later, Mel suggests that Lacey speak with Gypsy. Lacey is hesitant at first, but her mother encourages her to look Gypsy in the eyes after all of the lies. Mel ends up visiting Gypsy at the prison instead of Lacey. Mel confronts Gypsy and asks when she realized she could walk on her own 2 feet rather than use a wheelchair. Gypsy sighs for a moment and asks Mel if she can be her mother now that she needs one. She tries to explain that she trusted her mother until she refused to allow her to grow up. Mel's expression clearly shows that Dee Dee and Gypsy's lies have broken her heart because they were such good neighbors. Mel then says that Gypsy can't always be the person Dee Dee made her into, and she apologizes for not being her mother. Gypsy is now on her own. Mel concludes her visit by remarking that sometimes the only way out is through. Gypsy watches her leave, realizing that everyone close to her now despises her. The show then flashes back to the night of the murder. Gypsy texts Nick to notify her when he arrives at her door wearing gloves. She joins her mother in bed and recalls the time they spent stargazing together in 1997. As shown at the beginning of the episode, this is when they promise to protect each other. Gypsy becomes emotional as they talk because she knows it will be her last night with her mother. She abruptly tells her mother goodnight, and Dee Dee soon falls asleep as well. Gypsy begins packing her suitcase while Nick arrives at their front porch. She then walks on tiptoes through the hallway, urging Nick not to make any noise. Gypsy hands the knife to Nick and leads him to Dee Dee's room. Gypsy ducks into the bathroom because she doesn't want to see her mother stabbed to death. After a while, the horror begins when she hears her mother scream in pain and fights back with pain. Gypsy covers her ears, attempting to drown out her mother's agonizing screams. She paces around the bathroom for a while before collapsing on the floor and sobbing after hearing her mother screech one last time. After a brief moment of silence, Nick knocks on the bathroom door and requests admission. Nick is equally nervous, shaking and exhaling heavily after killing Dee Dee. He has blood on his neck and on the murder weapon. Gypsy grabs the knife but doesn't put on any gloves. She shakily rinses it with blood. As they remove the gloves, Nick's hand sustains a large cut. Gypsy then applies a bandage to the wound and cleans up her boyfriend with wet wipes. The couple then goes to Gypsy's room, but she stops when she sees her mother's body. Nick assures her that everything has been taken care of and leads Gypsy to her room. The couple is still reeling from what they've done, but Gypsy is determined to remain optimistic. She kisses her boyfriend, reminding him that this is the happy ending she's been waiting for. Yet another act. Nick then removes a slew of stuffed animals from Gypsy's bed. He drags Gypsy down, and the two become physically intimate with each other. Gypsy prepares herself with makeup in the following scene, while Nick takes his time cleaning bloodstains from his clothes. She then calls a taxi and abandons her pet guinea pigs in the wild. Gypsy packs her belongings and puts on her grandmother's ring. Nick asks her one last time if she's ready to run away with him, and she nods confidently. Finally, the two depart from the house. In the present, Gypsy is returned to her jail cell following her meeting with Mel. She misses her mother and fantasizes about being in her room with her. In the final scene, the audience learns that Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder after a year in prison. She is currently serving 10 years in prison and intends to start a family when she is released. Nick, on the other hand, has been convicted of first-degree murder and is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Then the series ends.